Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to discuss a very important topic that we often come across on social media, but usually overlook. Today's topic will be about body image disorder and the psychological aspect of weight loss processes. In other words, you could say it's a continuation of our previous video.
Yes, in recent years, I've especially noticed this a lot. Body image issues have become much more significant for people. It's also frequently pushed on social media. I think you've chosen a great topic.
Thank you. So, what is body image disorder? And how can we tell if we have it?
Yes, now let me explain body image disorder simply. Of course, let me emphasize this first. Since we're not making videos specifically for people studying psychology, for students, or for those who want to do this professionally, we try to explain everything as simply as possible and without jargon. So I'll explain this in the same way. In short, we can say it's having a perception about the body that is different from a realistic one. For example, seeing yourself as overweight, even though you are actually at an ideal weight, or for instance, most people might actually like your nose or your ears, but you've become obsessed with them, and now this is negatively affecting your quality of life. In other words, this negative situation becomes central to your self-esteem and self-identity, and it starts to affect you negatively. We can put it briefly like that.
For example, right now, everyone's nose is perfect.
Yes.
There are noses like baby noses with a little slope.
Yes.
For example, even if someone actually likes their own nose because of social media, they start to wonder why theirs isn't like that.
The effect of social media, yes.
We see it everywhere. So what determines the perception gap between what a person sees in the mirror and what is real?
Now, of course, there are also sociological factors at play here. In other words, the gap between the beauty standards or trends imposed on you by society at a given time and your own efforts to exist within that framework can actually lead to a distortion in perception. By the way, let me also say this. Not liking yourself or not liking a certain part of your body is different from having a body image disorder. When you don't like yourself or a certain part of your body, like your ears, nose, hips, etc., and you create an image in your mind and manage to change that part to match it, the discomfort usually goes away. But with body image disorder is different. There's definitely a drive for perfection involved. Your body has to be perfect. At the same time, there's also this, when you see the same thing in others, you really like it, but you still don't like it in yourself. Actually, there are underlying issues here as well. When we look into the reasons, we find structures that are formed either in childhood or adolescence, that is, during the period when one's character starts to take shape. For example, what are these? One of them is a neurological foundation. If, for instance, our brain doesn't produce enough serotonin or happiness hormone, or if we are born with such a structure, we naturally become more sensitive to criticism. Of course, these are the things that form the basis. Along with this, for example, it can develop during adolescence as a result of a trauma, or perhaps there is someone we take as a role model and we really want to be like them. If we have placed being beautiful, being very beautiful, and perfecting this as the central way to gain acceptance, approval, or admiration from society, then body image disorder or body dysmorphic disorder can emerge. The way one is raised is actually important as well. Here's the thing. Rather than the upbringing style, it's individuals who feel lonely or those who crave attention. Of course, these can also have different underlying causes. People who have a high need for acceptance or who rely too much on external validation are particularly affected in these areas. Of course, each of the things I've mentioned here could actually be a separate video topic, but of course we have to cover it briefly. Individuals can be prone to these situations because when we look at it, human beings are generally in search of an identity anyway. So it's completely normal for someone to need to be liked by someone else in order to feel like they exist in society. But how will they do this? Some people want to stand out with their appearance, their face, or I don't know, with a healthy, attractive, good-looking body, while others want to stand out intellectually. Some want to stand out with their style of clothing. In other words, however you decide to form your identity, you act accordingly. In body image disorder, the person has simply placed having a perfect body or perfecting a certain body part at the center of their identity formation.
When the process of losing weight turns into an obsession, how does this affect the person's daily life?
Now, actually, in parallel with this, there is bulimia nervosa and also what we call anorexia nervosa are psychological disorders where body image is also distorted. For example, in both of these cases, it's actually like a subcategory of this or similar to it. It's like a subspectrum. No matter how thin the person is, they still see themselves as very overweight. For example, this is also a body image disorder. And naturally, the person wants to keep not eating or continue losing weight because they want to reach that ideal weight. Of course, these are the extreme stages. These are illnesses that are harder to control or treat compared to a typical body image disorder. How does it affect daily life? It's very simple. First of all, what does it affect negatively? Self-confidence. You feel the need to hide, that's it. So what happens when the need to hide arises? You can't dress the way you want, you can't move the way you want. For example, you think you're very overweight, but you also love swimming.
Yes.
So now you have to give up swimming then? I mean, you can't do it. Let's say you want to go to the gym, you want to lose weight, or more accurately, you want to get rid of your excess, but you're worried about your body shape being seen, so you hired a fitness coach. They told you, yes, you are overweight. If this criticism affects you very negatively, you won't continue.
Actually, you know you're overweight. That's why you're going.
But hearing it,
Don't want to.
yes, facing it is something else. It means being exposed to it again. In this sense, what we call body image disorder actually affects our quality of life extremely negatively. For example, we usually see this in women, of course. Actually, when you look from the outside, what a lovely, beautiful lady she is. But her self-confidence is shattered because why? She looks at herself and doesn't like what she sees. I mean, you can't even convince her otherwise. Look, you're very attractive, you're very beautiful, and they constantly feel the need for approval. Am I always like that? For example, if it's related to weight, or if weight is also a factor. For instance, when they gain a kilo or two, they might react excessively. In reality, an extra kilo or two isn't something others would even notice on their body. But this is where the perception distortion comes in. So at this point, I ask viewers to reflect on themselves. People don't scrutinize us as closely as we examine ourselves. In fact, they can't even do that if you think about it. What matters to them isn't whether you've gained a kilo or two. It's not about having a bump on your nose or how your ears look, really. You are seen as a whole.
Yes.
How do you evaluate yourself from this perspective? Review how this situation affects your quality of life. Awareness is a prerequisite for correcting a negative situation. In other words, without this, change won't begin.